the rest. Greetings from Boston, everyone. Welcome to our third program of the series, COVID-19. Oh, no, actually, it's the second program. I don't know, I'm running too fast. COVID-19 and the New World Order. Today, we are focusing on Brazil. On behalf of Northeastern University and myself, I hope you and your family are staying safe and healthy during this turbulent time. As an institution, we are putting our resources into helping to find a cure for COVID-19 disease. We have faculty who are focusing their efforts on mapping the spread of the disease, preparing the next generation of highly skilled, versatile, and enterprising healthcare leaders, educating public about COVID-19 and supply chain, community resilience and response. I'm sure we all realize how important community is, and it's so wonderful to see so many of you here with us today. Before we proceed with the official program, I would like to make a couple announcements. First of all, to make the program run smoothly, please remain muted during the event and keep your video off. We are taking attendance, so please either rename your profile to your full name or type it in a chat box where you can type the same, where you can type the questions. You just click in the chat and it's the bottom of the toolbar of the Zoom platform. Now I would like to invite Santiago Balbuena, a distinguished member of Brazil community, for welcome remarks. Santiago?
Thank you, Yelena, and boa noite para todos. Aqui o Santiago. It's a pleasure welcoming you to this event, which is the first time we do online. I am sure it's going to be not the last in this series of events, because it's so easy to organize and so productive. So welcome everyone. Thanks for attending this a bit late in the evening. We have the privilege today of having a trio, which is going to make this evening wonderful, led by Professor Nikos Passas from Northeastern University, and with the cooperation of Jorge Pontes and Ligia, Costa, who are going to be introduced by Yelena. I just wanted to make the statement that the Northeastern community is growing. It's growing all the time, also here in Brazil. And we are all at your disposition, at your availability. So please do not hesitate to make contact for whatever reason, even if it is a, not necessarily job-related one. So without further ado, I think it's good that we start getting our hands in the dough, and I give back the word to Yelena. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Santiago. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Professor Nikos Passas. Nikos is a professor of criminology and criminal justice at Northeastern University. Nikos is a co-director of the Institute for Security and Public Policy. He is a visiting professor at the Basel Institute of Governance, a visiting professor in Vienna University of Applied Science for Management and Communications, Center for Corporate Governance and Business Ethics. Nikos is distinguished a visiting professor at Beijing Normal University, professor, distinguished practitioner in financial integrity, and senior fellow of the Financial Integrity Institute at Case Western Reserve Law School. He is also a head of UN Sanctions Implementation Legal Review Services at Compliance Capacity and Skills International, CCSI, and chair of Academic Council and the Anti-Corruption Academy in India. Dr. Passas received a 2017 Dr. Jean Mayer Global Citizenship Award from Tufts University's Institute on Global Leadership. Without further ado, Nikos, the floor is yours.
Hi, and good evening, boa tarde to everyone. What you see is actually where I would like to be. This is the background at my home in Greece. This is where I wish I could be, but this is just the background. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I usually do not wear a tie, but this is my African tie. So I'm wearing it in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I would like to say just a few introductory things and give the floor to our two speakers so that we can maximize the time that the community can interact with each other and with the speakers. Before everything else, I would like to mention that in the past, Northeastern had a research collaboration on questions that we discussed today with CGU, the anti-corruption entity that had a very high degree of independence from government and politics when Jorge Pontes was the minister at the time, all the way to the time when Luis Navarro was the minister. And our work was on anti-corruption, transparency, and inclusion of civil society in all kinds of programs, primarily related to public procurement, but also on questions of anti-money laundering, illicit trade, and so on. Unfortunately, with the financial crisis, this stopped, but I hope that once we are on the other side of this crisis, we're gonna go back to collaborating with our friends in Brasilia, Sao Paulo, Rio, Campinas, and everywhere else. So as this COVID-19 has reached all countries, the quality of governance is tested at all levels. Leadership is being revealed to be negligent or inspiring. We have the exposure of fraud and corruption, but also examples to emulate, as well as some to avoid. COVID-19 brings together all the new challenges on a global scale at the same time, and each country faces the risk of a perfect storm with health problems combined with economic depression in some instances and extraordinary debt. Everyone should be reminded that the world as a whole, all governments, entered into this crisis with a very huge debt, with a record amount of debt, both at the level of governments and the private sector. All this causes strains on governments, business, and people. In this context, what we have is new opportunities for misconduct, motives for people and organizations to take advantage of these opportunities, weaker controls as resources get tested also, and tendencies toward deglobalization, nationalisms which undermine trade, and international institutions which we desperately need for efficient handling of such crises. So there are all kinds of stages that the governments and societies at large are being put to the test. How well prepared for the protection of citizens as well as their economy going into the crisis? The public health systems, the laws and regulatory regimes, medicine, equipment, infrastructure, and so on. How they responded. Did they deny or did they accept science from the beginning to move into physical distancing, lockdowns, and government's interventions? And the question is, on the basis of all this, what does the future look like? What kind of reforms are we likely to see, and what long-term consequences might they have with new technologies, surveillance tendencies, emergency measures, powers that certain institutions and individuals claim, and so on? So when it comes to Brazil, and let me share with you some data regarding the governance metrics that we have from the country. Corruption and regulatory challenges are not new for Brazil. As you can see here, this is from the Harty School of Governance metrics. Brazil is ranked 70th out of 117 countries when taking together into account judicial independence, administrative burden, trade openness, budget transparency, e-citizenship, and the freedom of press. Transparency International's Perception Index ranks Brazil 106th out of 180. Global Profile ranks Brazil here 82nd out of 199 countries. Then the World Bank Institute notes some backsliding with respect to voice and accountability. You can see the numbers between 2008, 13 and 18, they go a little bit diminishing. The same thing applies to government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, and control of corruption. And the Hardy School of Governance also has started a new program prospectively looking at what the future looks like for Brazil. It notes that, as I was going to emphasize as well, all of these metrics are to a large extent misleading because they generalize about a huge country with extraordinary diversity. You can have a totally corrupt police department when you can have a federal transparent procurement program. You can have a city that manages well relations with the citizens and others that do not. So this kind of asymmetry within the country is a big challenge going forward. And as the Hardy School of Governance notes, it is a challenge for Brazil's federalism going forward with extremely poor regions and very high inequality and some authoritarian tendencies that are also mentioned there. So all kinds of crime have been noted, and our guests are going to be discussing them, from corruption and smuggling and counterfeit products, deforestation, misinformation, media manipulation, and so on. But I would like to note also a couple of good examples that a team of undergraduate students who have been doing research with me on a voluntary basis discovered and would like to share with you. The first example is the Comunidad Paraisópolis in Sao Paulo, where community leaders have actually taken it upon themselves to monitor health and to train 240 volunteers as emergency first responders, teaching sick residents how to care for themselves and about others via telemedicine. The second, so they got involved also into testing and tracing, effectively stepping in where the government was not present in comunidades or favelas, as they are more widely known. A second example I would like to mention is how civil society came together crowdfunding for food and hygienic supplies. And it became a popular alternative mechanism. Billions of reais have been collected in this way. And to some, this is reminiscent of the redemocratization movement in Brazil from the 1980s. And all this serves as a reminder that integrity, accountability, justice, equality, quality of environment and public health are not just the responsibility of governments, but also of the private sector, academics, civil society, the press, international organizations, donors, and each individual. With this, I would like to step aside and introduce Ligia Maura Costa, a good friend and professor of law and executive director of the Research Center of Ethics at FGV, the Fundação Getulio Vargas in Sao Paulo. Ligia has her habilitation degree from the University of Sao Paulo Law School. She has a PhD and an LLM degree from the University of Paris 10, and a bachelor degree in law from the University of Sao Paulo. She's the author of several books and articles. She has been consulting clients on corporate transactions targeting emerging markets, not only Brazil, but also China, Portugal, and other places, and has been advising also sovereign governments international organizations and state-owned enterprise. So with this, I am giving the floor to Ligia. Ligia, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor Nikos Passas. It's a big, big pleasure for me to be here. Good evening, Dr. Jorge Pontes. Good evening, Santiago Fernandes Valbuena. Good evening, Yela Surilov. And it's really a great pleasure for me to be here with you, Nico, and with this distinguished audience. I saw some names that I know, and it's really good to see people that I do know, even if it's going to be on a virtual basis. Nico, thank you again for inviting me here to be here, presenting a Brazilian perspective of COVID-19 and quality of governance. Before starting my presentation, I have a very brief PPT presentation. It's more with, pictures and photos, just, to provoke you a little bit for the questions that will come. But before I start my presentation, I have to make a disclaimer. The opinion that I'm going to express and during this presentation and during this event are, all my own opinions and do not necessarily reflect the views of Getulio Vargas Foundation. Said that, I'm going to, share the screen with you with some PPT slides. I hope that you're seeing well the PPT slides. And then I move on, from a very big introduction from global level and COVID, and then I comes, shorter to Brazil and the reason why we are here today. So I'd like, to say to you that actually countries around the world face a huge global health crisis, with the swift spread of SARS-CoV-2 virus and the diseases that it causes, which is COVID-19. The outbreak, I think that, has affected developed and developing countries altogether. We are on the same boat. Nations are actually struggling to control the COVID-19 pandemic. Promotion of health and safety for all citizens, it is a priority for governments, or at least it should be a priority for governments. Almost 7 million people have got the virus, and more than 400,000 have already died in the battle against the virus at the global level. These numbers are disturbing for all, I think. And the worst, they do increase day after day. This pandemic has exposed more than ever the cracks in health public systems at the global level, but also the cracks in governance as well. Coming to Brazil. Brazil presently sits on the top 5 list of countries more affected by COVID-19. After the United States, we are the country that has the largest number of cases. Regarding the number of deaths, we are not, in the second position as we are regarding the number of cases, but it seems that we will have, a lot of deaths, and maybe we'll get, the second position for both number of cases and number of deaths, which is very, very sad. From a perspective of a global website index, because we can talk a little bit further, we had a small issue regarding the data, the numbers of infected and deaths that we have in Brazil with the Ministry of Health. Yesterday, there was a court order for the Ministry of Health to actually back informing the numbers because the Ministry of Health has changed the method this last weekend, and now it's not actually promoting all the numbers, and there was a court order that has been issued by the Minister of the Supreme Court ordering the Minister of Health to actually publish the numbers again. So that's why I took the information from worldwide websites regarding numbers in Brazil that are equal today, 700,000 infections, which is enormous, and 36,000 deaths. Majority of those cases and deaths, they are in the West Southeast region of Brazil, represented by the states of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. But this is actually not, the big issue. The big issue, I would say, it is on the poorest regions of Brazil. The health system of the poorest states in Brazil suffer from systemic weakness that are making actually an effective response to COVID-19 impossible. This is a picture that I wanted to share with you. It is about, a picture of collective graves. And in Manaus, it's the capital of the state of Amazon, because the large number of deaths in Manaus, they were not actually, they could not able to do otherwise. They actually have to open up collective graves. And this picture has shocked Brazilians, and I suppose that has shocked as well, the rest of the world. And what I think that it is important to say, it is true that, an outbreak response for this pandemic requires speed, not bureaucracy. And the Brazilian Congress actually approved a legislative decree that recognizes the state of calamity and also says that the state of calamity is going to run until December 31st, 2020. The Brazilian government laid out an emergency fund package for fighting COVID-19 equal to $223 billion. Maybe for US standards, it's not a lot, but for a country like Brazil that is not one of the richest countries at the global level, 223 billion, it is a lot of money. And this morning, I was looking on the news, and then I got this quote from the global director in governance from the World Bank that I think that has everything to do, and it is very, very close to what I have to say to you tonight. So he said, the nature of the pandemic requires a speed response from the government. Fantastic. This is what I have already said. In the process of providing that speedy response, things can go wrong. And now I'm going to talk to you about things that actually can go wrong. SARS-CoV-2 is an invisible virus, but so is corruption, unfortunately. As Professor Nikos Passas has already mentioned, Brazil is a country that has systemic or endemic corruption. Due to the state of public calamity, there was actually a legal relaxation of public procurement rules in Brazil. More than 800 rules have passed to provide more flexibility in public procurement contracts in Brazil, really recently. In fact, the pandemic may be seen by some as a huge opportunity for corruption, especially in a country that has corruption as a systemic problem. Without relying on traditional anti-corruption policies and programs to identify, to control, and to prevent corruption, public funds can be diverged, documents can be forged, fraud, collusion, embezzlement. The imagination of corrupt criminals, it is endlessness. And in fact, corruption may harm government's ability to provide adequate health care, mainly for those more in need. Also, it may damage government's response to the pandemic. I brought you some pictures, I don't know if you can see very well, some pictures from recent cases from the federal police in Brazil regarding, fraud, corruption in COVID-19. The 4 pictures, 3 are from 3 different states in Brazil. The first one on your left, and up on your left, you have, an operation in Amapá, which is one of the poorest states that we have in Brazil in the north. On the right, we have corruption, the investigations of corruption in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo regarding the hospitals that have been built in order to contain the virus, the disease. And here in the back, we have the state of Minas Gerais that also has, problems with corruption regarding acquisition of medical supplies. And last but not least, we have then a Ministry of Health, which is a federal agency, that actually, instead of using the money to buy more respirators, is actually using the money to get publicity or something similar to that to a company that has been, and it is still actually investigated, of a company that provides fake news. So as you can see, it's quite of a challenge. And I brought to you tonight a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort, but where he stands at times of challenges and controversy." And then I have actually a question to you. Where Brazil's president does stand in this time of challenge? Where does he stand in this time of controversy? I can give you some ideas. I can help you on this, answer this question. Brazil president, after questioning the seriousness of COVID-19, because for him it was a little fluke, defined his own health minister's recommendation, denouncing a certain hysteria from the press, and actually shocking the country with statements such as "staying at home is for cowards." Yes, staying at home. Hi, Lila, can you please turn off your microphone, please? So with statements like, you know, "staying at home, it is for cowards." So it is really, really complicated, you know, this kind of statement, because actually the governors of the states in Brazil, as well the mayors, they were trying to convince Brazilians to actually stay at home on voluntary basis, on doing social isolation. And the president comes and say, "Listen, those of you that stay at home, you are cowards." So it's really, really complicated. But the worst, it's about to come, and I'm going to show you. When actually the Brazilian president has been asked about the 5,000 deaths that we had in the country, everybody was scared with the 5,000 deaths that we are facing. And then he has been asked to share his view to the nation, what he would like to say to the nation in view of this 5,000 deaths. And actually, he said that, "So what? Yes, President, we have 5,000 deaths. What do you want to say to the nation? So what? Sorry, what do you want me to do about it? My name is Messiah, but you know, I can't work miracles." Yes, so if you think that there are, you know, presidents that you do not, maybe you do not like your home and your president, but you know, we do have a president nowadays that has some statements that are really, really shocking. The nation was completely shocked with this kind of statements. And what it is worse, Brazilian president has never showed solidarity towards the families of Brazilians that died due to COVID-19. Brazil's president blames COVID-19 for compromising the Brazilian economy and his future chances of re-election. This is the big point. The pandemic actually arrived in Brazil when, you know, Brazil was already in a very fragile economic situation after several years of low GDP growth. Yes, the virus was really complicated, the pandemic was complicated, but the economy in Brazil was already in a very, you know, complicated situation. And from his perspective, the virus is going to really destroy his government. Some politicians have been talking about the impeachment of the president, but most political analysis, they believe that this is really not going to happen, especially during a current health crisis as we are facing today. And also, Bolsonaro still holds a power base of support, despite the fact that many have left him in response to his performance during the COVID-19 crisis. Many say that Bolsonaro's management of COVID-19 crisis is in fact Brazil's biggest threat. And to conclude, I'm just going to conclude now. I hope that I just, kept my 10 minutes. I'd like to leave a question for you. And this is my question. Will Brazil survive? Yes, this is my question. Do you think that Brazil will survive? So this is the question that I'm gonna leave on the table, and I hope, that you think about it, and then we come back while, you have, the questions in order to discuss a little bit about Brazil survivals. Okay, thank you so much, Nico, for this invitation. Thank you so much for the audience and for everyone that was hearing me. And I'm looking forward to actually have your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ligia. Let me introduce to you Jorge Pontes, who has been for 3 decades a federal police chief in Brazil, and his last position was Director of Education and Research at the Department of National Public Security at the Ministry of Justice. During his career, he served many important positions, including Director of Interpol in Brazil and Federal Police Attaché in Paris. He has a law degree from the Federal University of Amazonas and has graduated from the FBI Academy in the US. He has a postgraduate degree in criminal justice from the University of Virginia and was elected a member of the Interpol Executive Committee. He was the first head of the Federal Police Environmental Crimes Division and has published a book entitled Crime.gov with his colleague Marcio Anselmo. This is being translated and will be published in English very soon by Springer. Jorge, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. I would like to greet Santiago, Helena, Professor Ligia. I'm very motivated to participate of this webinar. And are you able to see my presentation right now? Can you see? Is it?
Not yet.
No?
Not yet. You need to click on share.
Okay. What about right now? It's okay? It's appearing to me, huh? No?
You have to click on your Zoom app at the bottom, share screen.
Yeah, it's not appearing.
We cannot see it. You go to your Zoom app, and from there click share screen.
Okay. Zoom app, share screen. What's going on?
In the meantime, those of you who are participating, please start entering your questions so that I have them ready for the panelists once we are done with the presentation.
What about right now? No?
It's coming now.
It's coming.
Now we
yes.
got it.
Yeah.
Is doing good right now?
Yes,
Yes.
it is. Now you can go to your PowerPoint app and move it from there.
So are you able to see it? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry about this. The thing is, as Professor Ligia said very properly, Brazil right now, we are not facing just, the pandemic of coronavirus. We have 2 extra challenges that I would say that is the institutionalized crime that affects Brazil as a kind of endemic or systemic corruption, as Professor Ligia said, and also the our own president that is actually is not facing properly the crisis. And my focus will be right now, my speech will be the challenge of facing the coronavirus pandemic crisis under the era of institutionalized crime. Okay, so as I said, the institutionalized crime is not organized crime. It's much more than organized crime. It's not only systemic or endemic corruption. It's a platform of corruption connected through the three branches of the Republic and the three levels of public administration, city level, state and federal level. So it's we can say that it's the crime perpetrated by a group of nuclear elements. So they're nuclear, they're not marginals, in relation to the public authorities and the state, business and social establishment, as opposed to the figure of the criminals. These crimes make use in a structuring way of government frameworks and the officiality on which it holds command, implying the power and capacity of influence and transversality embodied by the taking of formal and legal actions over more than one or all of the three branches of the Republic. It's a crime from the top to the bottom and from the inside out. So it's very important for us to try to explain how it works. Okay, I mean the organized crime, the traditional organized crime like the mafia or the gambling gangs or whatever, they are led by marginals, people at the margin of society, and the institutionalized crime are led by people inside, the nuclear people inside the system, inside the power. They are the power themselves. As the organized crime is conquered after several years, decades of violence, the institutionalized crime is conquered in a single election, a shortcut, and then you are in the top of the position of an institutionalized crime gang. So as the organized crime, we have family groups. Institutionalized crime, we have the political parties. The organized crime, we have a structured framework. In institutionalized crime, we have the structuring framework. In the organized crime, we have illegal central activities like drugs, like weapons smuggling and gambling, prostitution, whatever. In the organized, institutionalized crime, we have the crime itself is legitimate central activities like bids, like contracts, like big projects of infrastructure and tenders and public purchases. We have the support of infiltrated criminals in the organized crime. In the Brazilian institutionalized crime, we have the support of appointed agents. The person is appointed by the government to a certain position where he's going to take advantage and perpetrated frauds and so on. In the organized crime, we have the heavy weapons to guarantee the plots. In institutionalized crime, we have the official journal and that is going to, and the presidential or the governor pen to sign the decrees. Organized crime, we have the vendettas, I mean, as a violence reaction. Institutionalized crime, we have legislative process. They start process of law and also administrative process, processing rules and laws in order to intimidate prosecutors, judges, and investigators. And as in the organized crime, they split areas in the neighborhoods, in quarters and corners, where they operate the crime themselves, and while in the institutionalized crime, they split public companies, large budgets of the ministries and public enterprises. So we have, this is what we are facing right now in Brazil. We have like impassable obstacles, like armored, all the criminals we target are all armored by parliament immunity. They have formal power to appoint the chief of police and the attorney general and the chief of attorney in the state level. The criminals we target, they have the power to approve or not our budgets, the budgets of our operations. The criminal we target, they have the formal power to appoint and name their own judges, and also the formal power to pass laws to ensure their position protects themselves, and also to intimidate the investigation, as we said. And so we have these schemes compromise the national project. They cause frontal damage to democracy. Once they operate with vices. They invest in the elections of the candidates, and they start the legislative activities with fraud schemes. And also the national projects compromised once the projects are approved with the vector of corruption, and the corruption is born. The corruption is in the born of all initiatives, and also we would like to state that and we have right now a big problem with the
with
I don't know if we lost the connection there. He must have clicked the wrong button there. Well, until he returns, we can start entertaining questions. I do not know if Santiago wanted to ask the first question.
It will be my pleasure. It is a highly controversial issue, but I would like to delve deeper into Ligia's knowledge about the relationship between what's going on in this largely unknown process of fighting the COVID and the constitutional and legal framework under which Brazil has to operate. The federal government, the states, the municipalities are all entangled in a difficult to assess kind of thing. So I would like to hear her view about whether with the current institutional setting, different models of treating the COVID-19 would be possible or even feasible.
And Santiago, I think that I would really appreciate if you can answer the question again, because actually it was my fault. I was reading on the chat, you know, there is a paper that has been mentioned on the chat, and I was, you know, reading the paper. I thought that it was a very, you know, interesting, you know, mention, and then I heard my name that he wanted to, you know, to please. So sorry. Can you ask him again?
Of course, Ligia. Of course, not a problem. It's a great listening to. The question is the institutional setting of Brazil, which is especially complicated relative to other countries, multiple layers in government, federal, state, local. Is that a problem when dealing with the COVID-19, or is it a trait of personality of the current president that is making this thing very difficult? Other countries have unified systems. So whoever is in command makes the decision. For instance, Russia. In Russia, there is no question who is in command. He may be right or wrong, but there is a unified view. In Brazil, in the States, in many places in Europe, things are more shared. And I was wondering whether the institutional setting, which is difficult here in Brazil, has a lot of resonance to the way the COVID-19 is being dealt with.
Thank you very, very much for your question. It's a great question, wonderful question. I'm so sorry for the first time. And I think that it is important for everyone to understand, Brazil is a federation. Like US, we are a federation. And being a federation has never been so important for Brazil during COVID-19, because COVID-19 has very different angles in a continental country like Brazil. So for example, the north of Brazil, you have one kind of problem. The south, you have another. The southeast, another problem. And so the fact that Brazil is a federation and the states have independence to deal with, I think that it was very, very important to fight COVID-19. Not only states, but actually the municipalities. We have almost 5,000 municipalities, because each municipality can actually respond and see what it is in need, if it is in need of social isolation, or if you can open up, because it's so different from one location to another location in Brazil. Brazil, it's a very diverse country. And so the fact that we do have, a federal government, but unfortunately the federal government is not doing what we would expect. I mean, I would expect as a Brazilian, because it was to try to organize, the states. On the other hand, just, the federal government is trying to contaminate, the measures that have been taken by the Brazilian states. And what it is very interesting, the Brazilian states, they are all working together against the federal government. We have never, ever had that in Brazil, because there was always, a fight among the states in Brazil. And now it's funny to see, all the states together against, like a common enemy, which is completely wrong as well, because, the federal government cannot be enemies of the states, actually. And also it is where the money is, because Brazil is a federation, but all the money that is made on the states goes up to the federal government and then comes down to the states, according to the necessities. And last but not least, I think that it is important to share this with you, because it was a statement made by the mayor of the city of São Paulo. As you know, I don't know if São Paulo it is the largest one in Latin America, or Mexico City is the largest one in Latin America. They change, on this ranking in size of population. So I don't know which one it is on the first position now. But anyway, we are talking about 20 million inhabitants in the city of São Paulo. And the mayor said that, the social isolation and where are the locations that are going to open up, he's going to divide the city in neighborhoods. And it's gonna, because we do have actually the regional mayors, if we can say like that, in the city of São Paulo. And then what he is proposing is actually, as it is, the city is so big, you have so many people and has so many differences, like Paraisópolis in one side, and the most expensive neighborhoods, and where the Brazilian GDP lives, they are both in São Paulo. Nothing against Rio de Janeiro, but it's still, the big money still resides in São Paulo. It is still in São Paulo. So it is completely different. And the mayor said that, to fight COVID, he's going to give power for the regional and to the local regional mayors in order to decide if it's time to open up, or if it's, you can't, to continue on social isolation. So I hope that I have, answered your question, Santiago.
Yes, you have. And I'd like to give the floor back to Nikos to see whether Jorge can join us back, or we proceed with a different question.
It looks like the problem that Jorge has is that the signal dropped, and I'm communicating with him with WhatsApp to see if he can call me on WhatsApp, and we can use my telephone as a microphone for him. I know that we have questions for him, but in the meantime, if someone if someone has another question for Ligia, there is a question that I can read from Bonita Palivka for Jorge. perhaps Ligia has some thoughts about it. You heard the points that Jorge was making about the differences between organized crime and an institutionalized crime in Brazil. And the question is, what happens when the two overlap? As we have seen the case in Mexico, for example. Or I can think of possible connections between deforestation and or illegal mining and overlaps between institutionalized crime and organized crime. Do you have any thoughts on what special challenges come out of that?
So again, it is not actually a matter. George would answer this question much better than I do, but I can share with some thoughts with you, Bonnie. A wonderful question, very, very good question. I would say from my perspective, Bonnie, that we are not actually far away from what you face in Mexico. I would say that it is quite similar. What you are facing, we are also facing in Brazil. And I do not know about Mexico, but in Brazil, the problem that, you know, Santiago has already mentioned and Nico has already mentioned, for example, in Paraisópolis, the favelas that we have in Brazil, the communities as we call today in Portuguese in Brazil, that we have the drug dealers that actually have the command. And the problem is, for example, and the same day that the president went to the press and said, you know, only cowards stay at home, the drug dealer said, we are going to lock down the favelas and you are going to be home, you are going to stay home. And the problem that I see on that, it is that the drug dealers are having a control where the federal government actually should have the control, because people, especially the poorest people, they are dying much more, you know, than the rich people, unfortunately. And so they see the virus much closer to them than, you know, the wealthy and people in Brazil. And then the drug dealer saying, here is your alcohol gel, here you have to try to wash your hands, you have to stay at home. And even Paraisópolis, it's a beautiful example because there is a school inside Paraisópolis, and as the students, they are not having classes. So they have used, you know, the school to receive people that had actually COVID-19. So if you are sick, so you are going to be moved to the school, you know, like this, you're not going to contaminate the rest of your family. So it's really great. And the problem that we see, and it is that actually those owners of the community, they are getting much more powerful than before. And this is really a big concern, because you have, you know, the crime, the organized crime, and that it is going, so I think that there is a mix, and it's not far away from what you have in Mexico. Again, I'm not a specialist, you know, Jorge will be the one that can answer this question much better.
I can add something to that, given my previous work on Brazil and also other countries where an effort was made actually to examine the connections between different types of interfaces between legal and illegal actors. And contrary to what the conventional wisdom is that you have on the one side, you know, legal actors who are law-abiding and stereotyped organized criminal, the two interact in multiple ways. Sometimes they are, and the easy connection is that someone is paid off to turn a blind eye and engage in illegal activities or gain a contract or keep a business going in a particular case. We have seen that in the scandal of Petrobras and Odebrecht and others. In other instances, what you have is participation, synergy. Sometimes the legitimate actors are beneficiaries, are the customers. And we have seen multiple examples from around the world where in the disposal of toxic waste, for example, or in illegal logging, where you have people who are allowed to operate, and according to some jurisdictions' laws, they're breaking criminal norms, either their activity gets legalized or they operate in a jurisdiction where it is not covered, or you have immunity in practice. The special challenge that you have when those sorts of interfaces exist is that with a vested interests, you have extraordinary resistance to any effort for reform, for change, as well as for exposure. And that affects the lives and the livelihoods of reporters, of investigators, or the judges. And that is where, that is why we have all these indices about the quality of governance or rule of law and so on, because the in the end, it affects business, it affects the economy, it affects the quality of life, it affects justice, and in the context of COVID-19, it affects public health and not only livelihood, but also lives. So I do not know if the question has reached a point, if such interfaces in Brazil have reached a point where we're talking about capture of certain agencies or parts of the government or parts of business by people who commit serious offenses, who engage in illicit competition, and what impact that may have on international investment, on mergers and acquisitions, performance of stock market, and the growth of the economy overall. I know that Jorge is trying to communicate, but his Wi-Fi has dropped. He keeps trying to call me, but I don't think that we will be able to have him back. So go ahead, Ligia.
It is really a pleasure, and thank you, Bonnie, for the question, and thank you, for mentioning this this LinkedIn group, which is amazing, for Latin Americans, and for those of you that cares about Latin America, thank you so much. I will be happy to join you, and actually I do have, a research that I wanted to share, a survey that I want to share with you. I will take, a good opportunity of this group, and then I see that Bonnie has another question, Nico.
I do not see another question. I just wanted to add with respect to, well, you have a question. There is a question for you, in fact. Transparency initiatives are coming out of civil society. Do we have any initiatives from civil society regarding COVID-19? And are they conducive to accountability? Are they working to increase transparency and justice?
Yeah, and there is a quite recent, we start having, small initiatives from NGOs that work, against corruption. For example, Instituto Não à Corrupção, No to Corruption. They have just launched a website where you can denounce, where you can inform based on anonymity if there is any problem regarding COVID-19, and then you can take a picture and then you can inform and it can pass by. So I think that this is really, really important. Another thing that I think that is also important is not really the NGO, but we have, for example, the Brazilian press. And so in view of the fact that the Minister of Health was not actually disclosing the numbers anymore, so the press said, no problem, we are going to get the numbers from the mayors in the cities, and then we are going to put together in the states, and then we are going to make the calculation. So if the federal government does not want to say how many we have dying and how many cases we have, no problem, we the press, we are going to be all together, and we are going to provide this kind of information. So transparency, it is very important. It is inside the Brazilian constitution where transparency, it is really a mandatory issue. And that's the reason actually why we had that court order from the Minister of Supreme Court asking, the Minister of Health to actually disclosing the numbers in Brazil. And, but that's it. And then this initiative that has been just launched 1 week ago, it's really, really interesting. You know, if by any chance you have any issue regarding, you know, COVID-19, it's a way of the civil society to actually control. And another issue that I think that is important regarding transparency, Transparency International has launched a report about the transparency of the websites in Brazil regarding public procurement contracts related to COVID-19. They have just, you know, promoted this information 10 days ago. And it seems that we do have some states that are very, very good. But for example, the state of São Paulo is one of the last regarding, you know, transparency in its website related to the procurement contracts. I have heard that the website in the state of São Paulo has improved after the report of Transparency International. So we are trying to have this kind of initiatives to help out to get more participation of the civil society in order to avoid a huge corruption scandal again, as we have faced during the car wash operation.
So thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Ravi Ramamurthy, a professor in our business school, and the director of the Center for Emerging Markets. With so many institutional challenges to good governance in Brazil, how can somebody like Sergio Moro prevail? Is it possible that extraordinary individuals like him may be able to effect some change from within, from the bottom up?
To be very sincere, the last year, we faced one of, you know, of the worst, we not the worst, actually, we went back a lot regarding fighting corruption and fighting organized crime in general in Brazil the last year. So we have this challenge of having a president that has been elected to fight corruption. And it was during his presidency that a lot of acts from all the institutions together have actually compromised the ability of Brazil to actually fight in corruption, despite the fact that we did have a Minister of Justice like Sergio Moro in power in the government. But he did have, it was very clear, very limited powers, and he could not actually do too much regarding corruption. He was able to do some work regarding drug dealers and in another kind of organized crime, but not necessarily regarding corruption. And so this is, I think that this is the first point. I think that we were very lucky, and there was a lot of respect to the institutions, and the Brazilian population was really fed up with corruption. And so you put all these items together, and then you had, you know, very young Brazilians that really wanted to change the country, and they were all together, and they really made, you know, an important change regarding fighting corruption in 2014. Not only Sergio Moro, but I would say the 13 attorneys, the federal prosecutors from the workforce car wash. They were all very young and very bright, and they really want to, you know, to do the right thing. But we see in the country more and more individuals that really wanted to do the right thing. And what we hope it is that with all those individuals that really wanted to do the right thing, in the end, we can actually change the country and change this vision of a systemic corruption in the country. But as you know, it's going to take really long. On the other hand, we have, you know, to count on the politicians that they really wanted to change that, which is really, really complicated. And that's it. I hope that I have, you know, answered your question on that.
Well, it's a pity that we do not have Jorge, because in fact, he served with the
Sergio Moro.
Minister, right, he was with him. And as he has intimated to me, he resigned shortly after Maura left. So by just looking at this story, you know that people tried hard. And in his book, crime.gov, the government involvement, participation in institutionalized crime and corruption is what frustrated him. That's what motivated him to write the book, and what made him not be too optimistic about it. But at the same time, you know, you still are in a country where you can say that, and maybe you do not have good Wi-Fi to talk about it broadly, but at least you can publish it in a book and travel and discuss it elsewhere. But individuals against this kind of institutionalized resistance and misconduct, when powerful interests take root, and therefore you have all kinds of influences up against you. And I come from Greece. It's not very different in some respects there. Can be extraordinarily disheartening. And without individuals who can articulate a discourse for reform, who can rally the troops towards change, it's very hard to move things forward. I just published a paper on why anti-corruption is failing around the world, not just Brazil or Greece. It's everywhere. A problem that, despite the resources that we have been dedicating to anti-corruption and good governance and rule of law and development programs, when you look at the evidence on the ground, we haven't been able to move the needle. And here the question is, how can you in fact mobilize resources in a way that those interests that matter in society can build into the solution that you want to propose? In other words, the solution of the problems, anti-corruption, integrity, better competition, licit competition, and a better economy are built into the business model of companies and sectors and industries. And we have, in fact, some examples from Brazil, from Argentina, from other parts of the planet where collective initiatives, we discussed one of them last 2 weeks ago in Thailand, where more than 1,000 companies came together and created an anti-corruption collective initiative with impact and certification that is not just a paper that you can frame and you put on the wall and then you go back to doing what you used to do all your life, but it actually gains traction and makes a difference on the ground. So it is a combination of individuals like Maura and like the ones that we have seen with the Operation Clean Hands in Italy, where you had similar kind of leadership problems that then turned into movements that brought about some changes. And this combination of shining stars and individuals and collective initiatives while aligning interests. I think it is important to see where you can find a consensual knowledge and a commonality of purpose so that you do not expect only volunteers and people to engage in philanthropic and charitable kind of activity, but make integrity affordable, make integrity profitable, viable in a commercial competitive environment. I think that is the challenge, that is the key, that is where the Holy Grail lies. Now we do have some additional questions that are coming from the floor, and it is turning the question that you asked, Ligia, back to you. You said if you asked if Brazil is going to survive, and the question is, so can the country rise above the COVID pandemic and the institutionalized corruption? What is your prediction?
Yeah, so Rebecca, thank you very much for this question. I would prefer to hear from you because you're far away, you know, you're not inside, you know, the movement that we have in Brazil. What I can say, it is as follows. Will Brazil survive? Of course, Brazil will survive. We have passed through so many crises and we have survived. So that's for sure that we will survive. And I think that is going to be very hard on the country. However, I understand that when you have a very difficult situation and you are passing through a very difficult situation, you really have a huge chance of improvement. And it seems that, you know, Brazilian institutions, they are, you know, regarding democracy, they are trying, you know, to say we are here, we are a democracy, even if we have some authoritarian leaders, they are not going to affect the institutions, and we are here to give support for the country in this difficult moment. And so I think that after we pass that, we will have more strength to fight and to try to go back to the same track where we did have money. Yeah, we did have money, yes. Once we did have money in 2008, 2006, we did have, you know, the booming of the commodities was, you know, Brazilians said, wow, we can do things, we can, you know, buy things, we can have a better condition of life. And then we had the scandal of the car wash, and then we have, you know, the deep recession. So I know that we are going back again on a very deep recession, but, you know, we have already passed more than one recession and we have survived. It is a big country, but we will need really a country that is going to be united. And I think that the problem that Brazil may face, it is a new impeachment of president. But as I said, there is a joke in Brazil. There is a very popular TV show in Brazil that when you have, and you made, you know, 3 times the same thing, you have the right actually to call for a music. And so if you answer 3 questions right, then you have the right to call for a music, and it's a very popular TV show. And in the case of impeachment, I mean, my generation, I saw already 2 impeachments of presidents, and one very, very recent, you know, only 2 years ago, and 3 years ago. And now there is another possibility of having again an impeachment of president. So I think that, you know, we are learning. Brazil is learning. Brazil, it's a new country. There's a lack of education in the country. We're still working on that. But, you know, I think that we have already changed a lot. And even if we did go down the stairs that we are in, even though I think that, you know, we can actually change the situation. We are not going to change as fast as, for example, Singapore. No. If we change regarding corruption, it's going to take a while, but I think that the new generation is much more concerned about doing the right thing than, you know, previous generations, and that's for sure. So this is what I say, that, you know, it takes a while, but I think that we are going to succeed, and I think that we are going to succeed even stronger. So that's it. I think that I hope that I have answered your question, Rebecca.
So thank you, Ligia. One question has come about the role of the press in Brazil. We have seen a lot of misinformation. We have seen some campaigns from the president's office himself or his family or supporters regarding what is or is not effective against this problem, or how big is the problem. But then you have all kinds of checks and balances in a society where there are some powerful media companies as well. So what is the role of the press in this up to now, and what hope does it have for governance in the future, for clearing the misinformation out, establishing some factual basis on which people can engage in dialogue and deal more effectively with the problems at hand?
Yeah.
I mean, is the press working? Is the press performing this function, or is it also fragmented, powerless, and divided itself?
And again, I think the virus has united somehow the country, and if I can say like that, regarding institutions that were competitors, now they are trying, you know, to work together and to be together. So I think that this is good, but we still have, you know, a long way to go. I think that, you know, changes that have been made recently by the president are going to have a huge impact on corruption, the changes in the federal police. Unfortunately, George is not here to give his view on that. But the other thing that it is also good, it is you have the federal police, that it's an institution in Brazil, a very important and very respected institution. It will be more or less equivalent to FBI in US. And what we have, it is that even with the change in the head of the federal police, appointing people that are, you know, close to the government, like if the federal police was there to serve the governor and the government and not to serve the country. It is an institution. But the federal police is so independent that you do have, besides having the head from a nomination that was really a questionable nomination of the head of the federal police by the president, even though we did have, you know, investigations and operations, because the federal police is quite divided. So it's quite independent, despite having, you know, a unique head. So this is a good point for Brazil. But we are really facing a huge challenge. And many Brazilians are really, really very disappointed with this presidency and with some authoritarian positions that the president has actually trying to take, and that has been controlled by the Supreme Court. The same Supreme Court that actually has been an object of a lot of complaints from Brazilians during the car wash operation, and more recently regarding, you know, the possibility to have criminals in prison after the second appeal and decision. And now it is the same Supreme Court that is trying actually to calm down, or trying to control some authoritarian decisions that were taken by the government. Even if personally, I do not think that, you know, the Supreme Court should be that involved, but maybe it is the only institution that we have at the current moment.
Let me combine two other questions into one. You mentioned how some government officials have abused, have taken advantage of some COVID-19 funds for their own personal or political ends. Also, Jorge was telling us about how criminal organizations or individuals get to control law enforcement, the judiciary, and government offices. In this kind of environment, clearly business is affected. Do companies, and there are some multilatinas and some multinational companies and powerful powerful companies also in Brazil. Is there any resistance? Is there any appetite to do something about it? Is there any hope that they are going to get energized and say at some point, enough with all this, we need to do something to fix it?
I think so, but not now. Believe it or not, you know, Brazilians are at home, or they try to be at home. And so I don't think that we are going to have, you know, a very important movement right now. But yes, more and more you see people that it is really concerned with some measures that have been taken. And that's the reason why we start having actually riots against the president. So it was the first time that we actually had, you know, second time actually that we had riots against the president, despite the fact that everybody says, you know, you have to stay home. And so you see the movements, they start from somewhere. And if you think about the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in 2016, it has started in 2013. The initial, you know, riots was in 2013. So it really takes a while for the country to see or to understand that maybe, you know, we did, you know, a bad choice and try to change again. But as I said on my presentation, I have been talking to several, political scientists, and they all said, listen, we cannot change right now. Right now is not really the time, for a change. But it is really on the end of the tunnel for many people saying, listen, probably we will have to change, because the conduction of the government and the authoritarian way, it is really shocking everyone. We do not want to be a Ukraine or or to become a Venezuela, and because I'm talking about dictatorship regimes, where especially Ukraine or Venezuela, where you have the army together, where you have militias. They're going to support your government, and this is quite, really concerning for everyone, and especially for, huge Brazilian companies as well, especially for international companies that are in Brazil. And that's it. So I think that probably we'll have a new impeachment again. We can call for a music, after 3 impeachments of presidents. And I really hope that we did not actually have impeachment, but it seems that you're gonna have it. But if we do have, I really hope that it's fast, much faster than in the case of Dilma, because the country cannot actually stop again waiting for the impeachment of the president.
So in terms of impeachment, in times of crisis, things get very tricky. And we gave it a try here in the United States, but the way that checks and balances were supposed to work didn't actually go very far. How does impeachment work in Brazil? I have seen that some members of your president's party, in fact, have gone out of their way to make public statements against him, his policies, to call for his impeachment, and even to say that he belongs to the court in The Hague. In this kind of context, politically and legally, is an impeachment possible?
From a legal perspective, an impeachment in Brazil, it is so easy actually to prove and to have evidence of administrative crime. Actually, in case of Bolsonaro, we would have several evidences of administrative crime that would give floor for an impeachment from a legal perspective. But I don't know exactly how it works in US, but in Brazil, besides the legal aspect, we also need an economic situation that it is very, very bad, and plus the government actually loses the floor in the Congress. Until today, Bolsonaro has not yet actually lost completely, the floor in the Congress, and that's the reason there are 38 requests of impeachment that have not been, analyzed by the president of the Congress. The lower house, actually, it is where the impeachment starts. And everybody says that it has not been analyzed because there is no majority. If by any chance he thought that would be a majority, he would, put for voting. But even though many political science that said that even if you have, a majority, it is not really the right moment nowadays. We have so many people affected in Brazil. And I don't know how are the things in US, but here in Brazil, more and more you see people getting sick, and people that it's not only a number on the news, and I would say that we will have to wait a little bit further and see how the situation works. So, but from a legal perspective, you have already several administrative crimes that have been committed by Bolsonaro that could be the legal support for the impeachment.
And one final question, do Brazilians care about all this environmental destruction that has gone in the Amazons? I have been reading that deforestation has increased 64% since the beginning of the pandemic. Do Brazilians, in fact, show concern about this rise in environmental destruction?
I think so, and I would like to say that, I don't know if you know, but there was a famous video that occurred during the ministerial meeting. where you had the president and all the Brazilian ministers or Secretary of State, you know, to use the name in US. And it was really a scandal that has been, you know, disclosed for everyone, thanks to Sergio Moro, that he requests as an evidence on his on the procedures that are pending against him. And actually, we knew that the deforestation was really complicated. We knew that, you know, we heard a lot of things, but, you know, it was really far away, and it seemed that it was more, you know, from the external, the foreign countries that were more concerned about the Amazon, and it was not as bad as everybody said. But after that meeting that, you know, the whole nation watched the meeting and was, you know, really shocked with the terms and you know, the conduct, actually, the behavior, you know, that it is expected on a ministerial meeting like that. I'm talking about, you know, the high administration of the country, the top administration of the country. And I would say that when we heard the Minister of Environment saying that we have to take the advantage of, you know, of the current situation to try to pass legislations and to try to open up, and people and the press is not going to see what we are doing regarding, you know, diminished environmental protection, I think that this is really a concern. And maybe, you know, Brazilians start to think over and say, wow, maybe the numbers that, you know, we are hearing from Financial Times, Washington Post, saying that we are burning much more than before, maybe they are right. And the numbers of the government say that this is not real. Maybe, you know, the government was not actually being honest toward the population. So after, you know, the Minister of Environment said what, you know, the nation actually heard about passing the cows during, you know, the crisis. This is a very, you know, typical Brazilian expression when you live on a farm, and there is a very typical expression that says that when you have a cow that passes, you know, the whole, I don't know, the collection of cows, I don't know how you say in English, I think that I have never used this word, can pass from the same location. And this is more or less what he said. And it's why I think that afterwards Brazilians were much more concerned. And yes, we do not want to burn. We do not want it to be considered as a country that does not actually care about the environment, especially again, you know, the new generation. I know that sometimes, in some cases, we have to burn thanks to agricultural business, but not necessarily in some locations. And in the end, you know, the promotion of that meeting, that awful meeting for the Brazilians was good in the end, you know, to see more or less the kind of government that was actually in the head of the country.
Well, I remember during one of my visits in Brazil, somebody told me that the way that corruption and governance works in Brazil is you create problems in order to create opportunities. I think that we have to turn this on its head if we want to go forward to a more positive future, and that is to create solutions to problems in order to create opportunities. Let's create incentives for integrity and accountability, and perhaps this is a collective task, not only of Brazilians, but also from people from outside, because it is a common problem that we face elsewhere. And perhaps we should be putting our heads together on how these incentives for accountability and integrity can actually work in practice. With this, we reach the end of our webinar. Thank you, Ligia and Santiago, very much for joining us. We thank also Jorge Pontes, and let's make sure that he's okay after the cut off his Wi-Fi from where he is. So with this, I wish all of you a wonderful evening. Stay healthy and safe. And I look forward to seeing you in our next meeting when we discuss India on the 18th of this month in the early afternoon our time, or early morning our time, 9:30 Brazilian time. So thank you so much. And Yelena, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, Nikos. Thank you so much, Ligia and Jorge. I'm sorry that this happened to the connection. The presentations were absolutely wonderful, very interesting to hear what's going on. And thank you, Santiago, for your continuous support. And thank you, everyone, for your participation. Feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in receiving a copy of recorded session. I'll be happy to send it to and share it with you once I reviewed it and edited it. Thank you so much and have a great evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Santiago. Bye-bye.